comments are going to be relatively narrowly focused on the concept of an SSA. Much of my work in this area has been historical, and I will bring in some historical examples, but this talk is really going to be a conceptual one. A key claim of the SSA theory is that each new SSA promotes rapid capital accumulation over a long period of time. This view of an SSA links the SSA theory to long swings in capital accumulation. Just at the very time that the SSA theory was emerging, at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, what many call the neoliberal era was beginning. And it certainly, that era entailed the construction of a new coherent set of institutions that strongly affected capital accumulation. Yet it became clear fairly soon that this new set of institutions under the name of neoliberalism did not encourage capital accumulation that was rapid, certainly not compared to the earlier period of regulated capitalism, and for a number of countries, not even compared to the period of crisis and exploration that came, a transition that came between the two periods. This is annual GDP growth rates for 6 countries. They were all substantially faster in the regulated capitalism period than in what I think is the best measure of the neoliberal era, going from business cycle peak to business cycle peak to avoid effects from the business cycle. And for the US, the growth rate is barely faster than in what many regard as the unstable crisis-ridden transition period of 73 to 79. UK did a little better than in the transition period, but not as well as in the regulated capitalist period. The other countries did worse in the neoliberal era than they did even in the transition period. The belief by many that in the neoliberal era growth has been not very impressive set off a debate still unresolved as to whether neoliberalism, or some call it by another name, institutions of this period can be considered a social structure of accumulation. Some argue yes, because it's a coherent set of institutions lasting at least several decades that forms a framework for capital accumulation. Others argue no, because it hasn't been very rapid in this period. The main argument of my paper, which turned out a little bit different from the abstract, which is in the packet, is that the promotion of capital accumulation that is rapid should never have been considered the defining characteristic. And as I said, this was a mistake in the development of theory, and the paper proposes an alternative concept of the SSA, arguing that this alternative concept would have significant advantages. Now, I reread Chapter 2 of Segmented Work, Divided Workers when I started looking on this paper, believing that that is probably the most widely read, most influential statement of the SSA theory. And I came across a quote that I think is revealing. This is a quote from page 23 of Chapter 2 of Segmented Work, Divided Workers by Gordon, Edwards, and Reich. Notice what it says. It starts by saying the capital accumulation process contains 3 major steps. Basically, the capitalist purchase means of production of labor power is the first step. The second step is the production process. The third step is sale of the newly produced goods. Now, this passage combines 2 different Marxist concepts. One is the circuit of capital, traditionally represented by M, C, C prime, M prime. The second is the process of capital accumulation, which is traditionally defined as the use of all or part of the surplus value to expand the capital by buying a larger value of means of production and labor power. The analysis in this book, they make a good case that a supportive institutional structure is necessary for the circuit of capital and for making profits, appropriating surplus value. from the circuit of capital. But then they shift suddenly to an argument about the role of institutions in producing a rapid rate of accumulation. And this combining of the concept of accumulation with the circuit of capital made it seem natural to make this shift from a very plausible argument that you need these institutions to have the circuit of capital work reasonably smoothly to an argument that institution selection really has to do with some kind of maximization of the rate of economic growth. To try to clarify what I think is wrong with their argument, I'm going to do something not very traditionally Marxist, bring in a little syllogism here. Consider the following three statements. If you want to support the claim that each new institutional structure is favorable for rapid accumulation, you could do it by the following three statements. First, the need for rapid capital accumulation guides the process of creation of each new institutional structure. Second, there exists a set of possible institutional structures that would promote rapid capital accumulation. This is a rephrasing of the view that rapid institution requires a supportive set of institutions. And those two together lead to the conclusion, therefore, each new institutional structure will be favorable for rapid capital accumulation. Now, statement two is a reasonable statement. I think a good case is made that to have rapid capital accumulation in a given historical period or in a particular place at a particular time, over the long run, you need supportive institutions. But unless you have number one, you don't get number three, which is the claim that the institutional structures that you'll actually see emerging in sequence over time will each promote rapid capital accumulation. And it's statement one that not only is there no case made for it, that institution selection is guided by the attempt to, in some sense, maximize growth or expansion, but I think it's difficult to make a persuasive case for it. Where this is going to lead me to is a reinterpretation of how one should think about the social structure of accumulation. The Marxist view, I will start with the Marxist view of the individual capitalist, but it's not individual capitalists who create institutions, it's a social process that does it. But I think it's helpful to start with the individual capitalists, since they're the capitalists are obviously the dominant actors in the capitalist system. One thinks of a capitalist as an actor that is attempting to get the maximum possible surplus value. To appropriate surplus value at all, each step in the circuit of capital, the purchase of these production of labor power, the labor process, and the sale of the final goods must proceed relatively smoothly. Institutions that support obtaining a high rate of profit are clearly going to be something the individual capitalist wants. Now, it's difficult for capitalists to cooperate, to do anything because of the competitive nature of capitalism. And they are able to come together when the pressures are sufficient to get them to do so. History shows, I think, that capitalists are able, at least at certain times, to cooperate in creating institutions that will protect their core interests. And so, and you're not going to get a new set of institutions unless at least a major part of the capitalist class is cooperating in their creation. What are the conditions that facilitate, that lead to the creation of a new set of institutions? I think if existing institutions are failing to effectively support the circuit of capital, capitalists are going to be driven into action together to do something about it if that persists for some period of time. If the appropriation of surplus value is difficult, they're having trouble making profits for a prolonged period of time. If the average rate of profit has fallen substantially and remains low for a long period of time, capitalists will be able to overcome, they're likely to be able to overcome their competitive urges and get together, usually with others, several others mentioned. New sets of institutions are usually created not just by the capitalist class, but with allies from other groups. I don't think promoting rapid accumulation in the system as a whole is a core interest of the individual capitalist, nor is it something, a condition that normally will impel the capitalists to get together to change the institutional structure. Imagine, if you could, for a moment, an institutional structure which enabled the capitalists to appropriate extremely high profits, to allocate a very large share of those profits to themselves as individuals, but which did not bring a very impressive rate of economic growth. Perhaps you could imagine such a situation. But when today, this would not make capitalists think they had better junk the existing institutions and replace them with ones that will produce a faster rate of economic growth. I don't think it's a core interest of the capitalists that will lead to institution creating normally. Rapid accumulation does have significant advantages for the long run interests of the capitalist class. It provides a rapidly growing level of real output, which can be used to improve conditions of various groups that could cause trouble. It provides a rapidly growing pool of surplus value that can be used to respond to whatever threats the capitalist class might be facing. However, the long-run goals, such long-run goals, I don't think normally are the basis of cooperative action by capitalists to create new institutions. They're not so far-sighted normally, unless capitalism is facing particular conditions that focus them on the survival of the system. That's when institutions get created that bring rapid growth, in my view, but not normally. That is, capitalism doesn't, as the last line says, capitalism does not appear to have in general a mechanism that creates institutional structures that maximize the rate of accumulation. So let me next turn to something I think that can be said about the type of what I call in the paper institutional structures that are created under capitalism. If you look at the history, and I know the U.S. history best on this, if you look at the U.S. history of institutional structures, you observe two different types. Those that might be called liberal institutional structures and those that might be called regulationist or regulated institutional structures. These two rather different types of institutional structures differ along four dimensions: state-economy relations, capital-labor relations, relations between capitalists, among capitalists, and the character of the dominant ideology. In a liberal institutional structure, of which there have been a number in U.S. history at different times, first of all, the state plays a limited role in regulating economic activity. Secondly, capital is on the offensive in its relation to labor and does not agree to any compromises. Third, intercapitalist competition is of the cutthroat sort. And fourth, the dominant ideology glorifies the free markets. By contrast, in regulationist periods, of which there have been a number in the U.S., the first 15 years of the 20th century, the post-war regulated capitalist period, the liberal ones were the 1920s and today. In the regulationist institutional structures, the state actively intervenes in economic activity, and I believe not just in ways that benefit workers and other popular groups, but also in ways that benefit capitalists' long-run interess in ways that they don't. The state does not in liberal structures. Second, capital-labor relations are marked by an element of cooperation and compromise. Third, intercapitalist rivalry is co-respected and muted. I mean, the change in the nature of competition from the era of regulated capitalism in the U.S. to today is so dramatic. I remember a passage in Monopoly Capital, published in 1966, Moran and Sweezy's book, saying that big corporations simply do not lose money. And it was true in the U.S. You know, in recession years, their profits were lower, but they were always positive, rather large positive. In boom years, then they were even bigger. They also didn't go for each other's jugular. You know, they never went bankrupt. They weren't going to lose money. How are they going to go bankrupt? In the neoliberal era, you know, big corporations have to worry if they're going to be around in 2 2 years. They're going to be driven out of business. It's a very different kind of competition. And fourth, the dominant ideology in a regulationist institutional structure warns of the dangers of unregulated market activity and heralds the contribution that government can make to economic progress. So that's actually what I was taught in graduate school in the second half of the 60s in the U.S. Mainstream programs by mainstream economists of that era. That that was the dominant economics orthodoxy. All this free market stuff had been consigned to the dust heap of history in that period. It wasn't very, very deep in the dust heap, it turned out, but that's what we were taught at the time. Now, I think both historical evidence and theoretical considerations suggest that, in general, a regulationist institutional structure promotes capital accumulation that is both faster and more stable. I'm going to skip this to save time, but actually, I still have 5 minutes. So this is the 4 periods, by my accounting, in the U.S. of the first and second regulated ones, the first and second liberal ones, and I compared the growth rate. Now, a lot rides on the beginning and the ending years of these things. You can really cook the data to get the answer you want. So I used every method I could think of, and I could only think of 4. So the first one is what I thought was the best definition based on institution creation. The second was business cycle peak to business cycle peak. The third is trough to trough. And the fourth is best decade, peak to peak. And by the first 3, both regulated structures produce substantially faster economic growth than either liberal institutional structure. If you take the best decade, the 1920s, turns out pretty good. It was a really pretty good decade. It loses its Great Depression tail, and so then it doesn't quite work out. But 3 to 1, it's the economies. It's pretty persuasive. A regulationist institutional structure, I think, strengthens capitalism's tendency to develop the forces of production. However, a liberal institutional structure has significant advantages for the capitalist class, which Michael Wright just showed us with some data. Wages are driven down, increasing the profit share. The distribution of income shifts sharply in favor of capitalists and more generally the rich. The same thing happened in the 1920s in the U.S., by the way. In the 20s, productivity grew extremely rapidly, wages stagnated, profits skyrocketed. They even, but I shouldn't get off my topic, but there were bubbles, speculative bubbles. It had a lot of similarity to what we see today. Now, what explains
is there a
these?
Forecast?
Excuse me? Forecast? No. Economists can only explain the past. What explains the periodic occurrence of the 2 types of institutional structure? In my view, the inherently competitive character of capitalism tends to pit individual capitalists against one another, and that in some sense they feel more comfortable. They prefer liberal institutional structure. It's kind of the natural institutional structure for capitalism. I know natural is kind of a no-no word, but I use it anyway. It provides a maximum freedom for capitalists to compete. It weakens the working class. It facilitates increasing the rate of exploitation. While a regulationist institutional structure may have long-run advantages for capital accumulation, and the stability of the system is difficult for the capitalists to cooperate to create them. To do this requires that they suppress their natural desire to grab as much as they can from each other and from the working class. The historical record suggests that regulationist institutional structures have arisen only when certain historical conditions force the capitalists to agree to either adopt one or to go along with adopting one when it is created by some other group or class. And when these conditions pass away, so does the regulated structure. I think there are basically 4 kinds of historical conditions that have led to the emergence of regulated structures before. First, when a group comes to power in a pre-industrial state that is determined to develop rapidly and realizes that the only way they're going to do this in the face of more powerful competitors is to use the state, to create a developmental state to do so. And this is, Germany and Japan in the 19th century, Turkey, South Korea, and China in the 20th century are examples of this. And it's interesting that in every case, the group that led the development of the state did not come from the capitalist class, but from some other group. It's difficult for capitalist classes to put forward individuals even who can effectively lead a developmental state. Second circumstance, in the next three involve advanced capitalism, high-income capitalism, developed. The emergence of major political threats to the capitalist class. Here I have in mind, in the U.S., in the beginning of the progressive era, there was a powerful anti-monopoly movement that really scared the capitalist class, and a rapidly growing socialist movement in the U.S. And this persuaded a significant part, although at that time only a part of the capitalist class, to support significant state regulation of themselves. J.P. Morgan's man, head of U.S. Steel in the first decade of the 20th century, told the Congressional Committee, if the government wants to set the price of steel, we would have no objection. There was part of the capitalist class that definitely favored regulation of capital. Third, and by the way, after World War II, when there were powerful communist and socialist movements and a powerful alternative socioeconomic system, again, this led the Western capitalist classes to agree to a welfare state and forms of regulation that would make the system more stable and grow faster. Third, a severe economic crisis that threatens the survival of capitalism, such as the Great Depression of the 1930s, led capitalists to favor powerful state regulation of the economy, which they understood would make it more stable and make the current pattern. I'm following the pattern here. Some of the others going over. And I'm almost done, however. And fourth, a sharp reduction in competition due to political economic developments. In certain periods, political economic developments have led to monopolized or oligopolized markets. And in those markets, the capitalists become the way Brand and Sweezy described it. They no longer have to worry about the short term. They are safe for the short term. They tend to then look to the long term and tend to see the advantages of a regulation state for their long-run profits and also for long-run growth, although it's really the long-run profits that I think attracts them to it. Well, I'll skip over saying more about that. What produced the neoliberal era specifically is the disappearance, in my view, of the factors that had brought the regulated post-war structure. During the course of the post-war regulated capitalist era, world capitalism shifted from national oligopolistic market structures to a more competitive form. By the late 60s, early 70s, just about the time monopoly capital came out, the situation was changing, and the capitalist enterprises of the leading capitalist states were penetrating each other's markets and turning them into very different kinds of markets in autos, steel, automotive industries. And this removed one of the bases. I think this basically it turns big capitalists into small capitalists. And if you look at who opposed the regulation of the state in the U.S. during the regulation of the state era, it was small business and their organizations. Well, big business turned against it after the mid-70s as they began to face conditions much like small business always faces. Second, the political threats to the capitalist class from radical movements in the state socialist system dissolved. First, in the 70s, 80s, left-wing parties became weaker, and then at the end of the 80s, I don't know what was there, but it's not there anymore. Hope it was nothing valuable or breakable. Pressing my case too strongly. When the state socialist system dissolved at the end of the 80s, that took away one of, again, the major reasons why capitalists had come along with the regulation of the state. And then the Great Depression receded into the mists of the past, and soon not just economists, but many business thinkers believed it could never happen again, so we don't really need this big state. Okay, concluding comments. In my view, while I argue in the paper that I like the term institutional structure better than SSA, sometimes history has to trump theoretical clarity. And SSA is a very well-established concept. There's a lot of important work that has been done in this school, and I am not advocating replacing SSA by institutional structure, although there would be some advantages to it. Besides, institutional structure is an awkward term and has a terrible acronym. So SSA doesn't have any acronym, but that's better than is acronym. So what I propose is reinterpreting an SSA to mean a set of institutions that forms a framework that supports the circuit of capital, the appropriation of surplus value, and the capital accumulation process. To jettison the idea that is connected with rapid capital accumulation. Some SSAs are and some are not. It's not a defining characteristic. Adopting this altered concept would not only improve the coherence, persuasiveness, and consistency of the SSA theory, but it would also put to rest the debate over whether neoliberalism is an SSA, because by this concept of an SSA, neoliberalism clearly is, although I suppose leftists would still find a way to argue